Yes. With the star grind, we don't pay our speakers to come, right? They pay us with their time. The time of VCs, founders, CEOs is very expensive. So what are we going to do is at the count of 3, you're going to stand up and give the biggest rockstar applause to Lina Chong. 1, 2, 3. Go for it. Yeah. High five. Yeah. Oh my God. There's a lot of energy. There's a lot of energy in your high five.
We needed more energy, so I thought I'd give it a shot.
You've been doing this for years, haven't you?
No.
No. How many times have you been welcome on stage as an entrepreneur? Sorry, as a rock star.
First time.
First time. It was a pretty good one, wasn't it?
It's pretty good.
All right, let's start with with your background. I always like to break the ice with covering a little bit where you grew up, what was your surroundings, and what's your story? Because to many people in the room or in Barcelona, you're not super well known because you arrived from Berlin a few weeks/months ago.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe you want to introduce your story a little bit?
Yeah, very happy to. I'm born and raised in Los Angeles. Los Angeles, yes. I worked in the Valley for a year. I was actually studying and working to become a lawyer in copyrights and intellectual property, and realized I hated my life. Simple. It's a really, I think for some people they're amazing at it and they love it. They probably like the abuse, but I didn't. So I moved to San Francisco. I literally had nothing. It was 2008, by the way. We were talking about this earlier. There were, Harvard MBAs and Berkeley engineers all vying for Facebook internships. And I realized it is not the right environment to be there. It's too saturated. It's, nothing's really growing. It's, so I decided to do something I never thought I would really do, and applied for a master's in Europe. So I moved to Germany in 2009, and I've been in Berlin ever since somehow, on and off. So yeah, I've founded 2 companies.
Let's talk about that, yeah.
Yeah.
Can we talk about your entrepreneurial side of that story?
Sure. What do you want to know?
First company, let's start with that, because I know you created 2 of them. One of them you sold it to Living Social, and then there were some struggles you had with the second company or the projects that derive from that. So maybe let's give some context to people here.
Absolutely. So I did work with a few angel investors, and I was very, very lucky to have found a good network of people who supported me. I'm clearly an outsider. I didn't speak German. I didn't know anyone in Berlin back in those days. And I effectively offered up my time and my services for free. That was my second time. I worked for an angel investor also in San Francisco. I studied philosophy in undergrad. They had no use for my philosophical abilities, right? So I literally, that's how I kind of broke into the market. I worked for free. I worked for very cheap for 3 months. And I said, if you like my work, you have to hire me full time. It was a gentleman's agreement and gentlewoman's agreement. And they both ended up really supporting me and backing me. So the angel investor, Michael Bream in Berlin, ended up funding or backing both of my startups. The first one was in Indonesia. So he was like, how would you feel about moving to Jakarta? And I said, yeah, sure, when? Next week? Cool, I'm there, right? So I just flew over to Jakarta. I had a co-founder, Arne, and we grew and operated the company for about a year and had some offers from back then Living Social and Groupon. I don't know if you guys remember, Living Social had raised something like 250 million from Amazon to effectively grow worldwide and compete. So we had lots of acquisition offers and decided it's time to sell. And good thing we did, because soon afterwards Groupon stock had kind of, they went public, tanked. So it was definitely a lot of luck and definitely really good timing.
I wanted to ask, so did that mobility that you offer help you to get this kind of jobs? Because clearly, studying philosophy doesn't sound like very helpful, but so being able to travel to Jakarta the next week or even that, that willingness to work for free, did that help you to land these jobs? And would you recommend it to other people?
I think, it is part of your values as well, right? You have to give before you can expect anything. And if people don't really know you, why would you be different from anyone else in the crowd? The best way to demonstrate your value is to show it, right? And I think it's really one of the best ways that I found to really form close relationships with people. Is do a lot of volunteer work, just give your time, right? And I think this, for me, it paid out in a big way.
How about the second company? So how did you transition from, exiting your first company, and what's the most positive thing, perhaps outside of the cash, that you take out of this?
Yeah. The transition was interesting. So, I was young, I was in my early to mid 20s. My ego was about the size of this room, right? So I thought I could do anything, I can go anywhere. And yeah, I had this great, network of investors. And so it was relatively quick to get into my next business. I had wanted to start something, let's say, a little bit more original than a Groupon clone. So that company was, it did kind of, you could search for real inventory, so stuff, in physical retail locations. And we started with women's mid to high-end fashion. So if you wanted a Rick Owens dress or whatever, and you didn't want to just shell out $1,000 without trying it on, you would effectively know where to go offline and try it and hopefully buy it in store, right? So that was the whole idea. It was an interesting transition. It required a lot of different kind of thinking and work, a lot of product thinking, because in a clone, let's say you have almost an equation, right? It's really just about execution. How well can you fill in those blanks and do them in an order that would really kind of provide that outcome. With starting something a little bit more original, no one is there to tell you what is right or wrong. No one is there to really show you, speaking of market fit, what is market fit, right? So I learned a lot in that, way more in that second company, I must admit. And also the fact that we ran out of cash, and we were in a very weird mid situation where we weren't growing that fast. We had just, it was a little bit of a strange, let's say, an early valley of death, and we couldn't raise additional funding. So effectively, I had to make a very hard decision along with my shareholders to seek out a kind of acquisition. The acquisition was for the product and for the founders. And the acquiring company decided to do something completely different with the product that I couldn't stand behind anymore, and I left. So that was a really interesting experience.
What were your struggles as an entrepreneur? Because we love talking about successes, right? But the chances is that most people here in the room, or people like me, we're struggling to be an entrepreneur because we don't share that enough. Which were your biggest struggles? Not being able to cope with the pressure, not being able to... How did you, for instance, let's start with an easy one. How did you create a network for your first company if you were new to the city?
I would say that was actually the easiest part.
All right.
It was really meet people, right? For me, I would say put yourself out there, go to conferences, go to also events that are not obvious. So one of the big things that what I tried to do more often was not just attend tech conferences. I went to things like art galleries and museums and concerts, right? Because people still have lives and they have interests, and you end up meeting very interesting, fascinating people when they have their guards down, right? So they want to enjoy themselves. They're out there to make friends. And I would say I've had a lot more, let's say, interesting conversations and connections with those people when they're not in their,
Perhaps because it was not perceived as a transactional meeting right from the get-go.
Exactly.
And how about the struggle? So what did you find difficult?
I mean, for me, it was very much a self-realization kind of journey, right? So I realized that entrepreneurship is not just a PowerPoint, and it's not just an MVP, and it's paying people a salary, these people may have families, right? It's a real responsibility. People are entrusting you with millions of euros, and it's a lot. It's a lot to take on your shoulders. So for me, I think one of the hardest parts of entrepreneurship was definitely an emotional, the emotional aspects of it, right? It's incredibly lonely because you're a founder or you're a CEO, or I very often felt like I couldn't go to my co-founder or my employees, the people that I see like 99% of my life back then, right? I couldn't talk to my shareholders. I couldn't talk to anyone. So my family didn't really understand what I do. They were like, "What are you doing over there? You thought you were going to be a lawyer." So definitely the loneliness and the challenges and not being able to really connect with many people in that respect was definitely hard. I think the other thing was to realize that emotionally I was not quite there to take on so much responsibility, right? Who knows, maybe I would have grown with it if it had panned out differently. But I think there was a real big realization on, wow, like, okay, this is an actual thing that I'm responsible for. Like, it's a child almost, right? So
Yeah, exactly.
scary.
Not a lot of people open up like that, so I'm really thankful for this, because I think that most people perceive you from the outside, like when you're an entrepreneur, right? And there's a lot of entrepreneurs in the room. Raise your hand if you're a founder. Hey, and this is like 10, 20%. So there's a bunch of entrepreneurs here, and basically what you publish on social media, for instance, or what you tell your parents is like, yeah, everything's fine, but then, in backstage, it's perhaps not so fine, right? You struggle, you had to fire people, maybe you the funding, you don't get it, like things like that. And because we don't share that, do you think this doubles down, or like this creates a more exaggerating story of entrepreneurs being successful all the time?
Does it create a more exaggerated story, or sorry?
Exaggerated, so more like everything, like all entrepreneurs are successful, but we know that they are not, right?
It's definitely a one-sided story.
Yeah.
And it's a very passing moment, right? Like those small wins. I mean, it's important that you celebrate your wins, but those wins are few and far in between, honestly. And I would say I always tell people when I'm, now I'm working on the other side, right? I'm in venture capital, and I really question some people on what is your motivation to do this? Do you really fully understand what your life is going to look like for the next 5 to 10 years? Because it's not going to look great. So definitely exaggerated, but it's also important to celebrate those moments, right? Because that's what we live for in a way. We want to realize something in the world or manifest something in the world that wasn't there before, right? Or improve something in the world that we saw could be better.
Now that you are on the other side of the table, that's why the name of the talk, right? Both sides of the table, because you've been an entrepreneur and now you're the one giving the checks, right? And paying the money, right? So do you feel like you empathize more with the entrepreneur when they are struggling, or can you have different kind of conversations as opposed to other VCs who are not founders, haven't been founders themselves?
Absolutely. I mean, it's a very difficult balance, and I'll be super honest. I think I do have way more, let's say, detailed, in-depth conversations with some of the founders that I invest in. It does give me a lot of information that, late at night I'm like, damn, I wish I didn't know that. But What
do you mean? Can you some examples?
Yeah, he's like, let's say there's an entrepreneur and he or she is struggling with something, right? And it's something where I feel like, okay, if you're going to be raising a 10 million check, you should absolutely have this like under your belt. Like, you can't be freaking out about this now. It's a little too late for that, buddy. Like,
Right.
So I mean, there are just some like more fundamental, let's say, either characteristics or behaviors or knowledge that at some point you really need to step up to that plate and behave professionally. You need to know your stuff. And if you don't, you hire the best people possible to cover the bases where you're not strong, right? So let's say you're a small team and you're growing very fast. You have raised some seed capital, maybe in a Series A, and now you're starting to raise larger and larger checks. And sometimes our conversations are of nature where I feel like they're still raising that seed round, right? And so Absolutely. I do have different conversations and let's say a different relationship with some of the founders because I do understand where they are. On the other hand, it's not always easy for me to, contextualize all of that, right? As a venture capitalist.
And do you think like they open up more just because they trust you? It's kind of like, when there's like in football, there's a significant difference between like coaches who have been football players themselves, as opposed to others who have like studied and perhaps they're successful, but they're like, yeah, but you didn't win as many Champions League as I have won, right? So why should I earn your respect? Does it happen in this world as well? I'm genuinely curious here.
Yeah, I think the question of respect is a weird one. I legitimately respect everyone who even tries. I think this is, for me, that was, that's reason enough to have a tremendous amount of respect for someone. I can't speak for other investors, for sure. I can only speak for myself. I don't compare my path with theirs. I think everyone's path is quite a bit different. I think everyone tends to bring different strengths and perspectives to the table. That's not really the line of thinking, I would say.
How about these struggles that you share? They're not so common, right? To speak up in public or to open up. But lately, because I've also been investing myself, and in some of the investor updates I'm getting from certain very specific people, they also include that part. As in, like, so there's the financials, projections, asks, like, big wins, big fails, but it's like, hey, personally, I'm doing this, or like, I'm feeling like that.
Yeah.
Are you seeing that? Is that a trend in the industry, or
would
you appreciate it?
I do appreciate it. I don't see that as often as I would like, because I do think the health of our founders that we work with is tremendously important, right? They do have, in a sense, the weight of the world on their shoulders. I wish I saw more of that. I do see, however, more and more lines like, what keeps me up at night? But it's not a personal update. It's literally like, oh, we could be growing like 8 times rather than 2, 4, So I'm like, okay, really? Is that really what keeps you up at night? Okay, sure.
That's good. How did you transition from being an entrepreneur to the investment side? Because actually we didn't cover that.
Yeah. So my second company was, we merged it, I got out, and then I spent like 3 months literally in bed eating cheeseburgers, binge watching, I don't know what I was, Gossip Girl, I forget. I was incredibly depressed, and I felt incredibly lost, and I didn't really have a compass anymore because I didn't have that North Star metric. I didn't have like all the things that I was kind of used to building the last couple of years. Prior to that point, and I thought, okay, what do I now do with my life? I'm more or less a generalist, right? I don't specialize in any one topic area. I studied philosophy. I did get my master's in law and business afterwards because it was kind of like a huge insecurity for me. And by the way, I am not knocking on philosophy degrees. I think it is an amazing, amazing degree in retrospect. It pays out later in life, let's say that.
Right.
Yeah.
When you're 80 or something like that, maybe?
No, I would say like now. I feel maybe my soul is 80. Maybe
it's like
when
you turn into a Greek philosopher or something like that.
Exactly, growing a beard and all that. So yeah, it's I was definitely really depressed and I was really lost. And I asked some of my investor friends, what should I do? And they're like, you should maybe consider venture capital because it's typically not a job that you stay in forever, right? And it does give you a really nice platform to check out what is actually going on out there. As an entrepreneur, you tend to be incredibly pigeonholed into very, very specific verticals or industry or topic areas. And you tend to get a little bit lost or you feel a little bit obsolete compared to the next hot thing, right? So I took that advice to heart and actually I approached my entire network of investors that I had pitched. And eventually I found a very, very amazing, it's a great fund called Hasselplattner Ventures. They say it's like Berlin, but it's actually in Potsdam, Germany. And yeah, I got my first start there. Thank God I didn't have to work for free this time.
It seems like it could be like a good opportunity or an alternative for people who want to work with startups that they don't have what it takes to actually run a startup. Is that the way of it? Would you agree with that or?
I think venture is an incredibly ungrateful job because of the fact that no one actually knows what a venture capitalist does, and no one really knows what makes a good VC versus a bad VC, right? There is no one set of skills that I would say really compose like the ideal venture capitalist. What I can say though is that in my experience, the better investors, they definitely have let's say they're quite creative in the way they see the world, right? So they see a world of possibilities. They're in the end, really good VCs that I've met, whom I've met, are optimists. They're optimists. They're a bit dreamers, right? But you refine that by keeping your realities in check with things like business plans and assumptions and the numbers and market data and interviews, right? So yeah.
You got to be optimistic. Most of them, they don't even return the money they raise. So, it's kind of like a difficult position to be in.
Right, yeah.
That's just something that is there. But I wanted to ask, so in circling back a little bit, because I wanted to dig deeper a little bit into the part that you said, like, I was depressed, but you didn't share why. And I recall from our conversation earlier that it's like, I was not as successful as in my first company, and that actually created that feeling of I'm not able to cope with this. So is that something you wanna talk a little bit more, and like why did that sensation appear in you? So why were you not satisfied as my second company is not as big as the first one?
Yeah.
And why did you give up actually?
Why did I give up?
Yeah.
I wouldn't say I've given up. So I can get to that story later, why I'm in Barcelona. But I mean, I would say one, it was a huge reality check. The delta between what my expected outcome was, right? I've built one thing, I've sold it, I can surely do it again, right? That was very clearly in my mind. And also the people around me, they had expectations, right? And I think those things don't just go away. And they don't, in fact, they actually compound and increase over time. People just expect you to become even more successful in life. For some reason, that's the expectation. And that was certainly the expectation I had of myself. So in my second company, when it wasn't quite going the way I wanted, and it was like literally a year of, I remember some nights crying under my table, right, and sleeping in the office and going, oh my God, how do I pay these people tomorrow or next month, right? Not tomorrow, next month. It was I realized that it is incredibly, the next thing that I do has to be way more thought through. It has to be something I would really go to bat for. This was a vision that I saw an opportunity in the market. I saw really cool technology coming up, and I thought, why don't I just put these things together and try to build something out of it, right? The problem that I was trying to solve wasn't something that I could really honestly say I was super passionate about. And it wasn't something that I would really go to bat for. In fact, it became often a narrative of, I have to do this. This is my responsibility. It's my duty now to do this, right? And I think this mixture of, oh my God, this delta is getting bigger and bigger. How am I going to demonstrate and prove myself, not just to these people, but to myself, right? And combined with the fact that, all the other emotional stuff that was happening, right? And the responsibility and the realization that maybe I'm not doing this in earnest, and maybe that is not really the right starting point for a real successful setup, right? It's just not the right starting point. So I did get, afterwards offers to join other people as co-founders. I got, I had other opportunities. I also had ideas of, what should I do next, right? I just decided to kind of side plate all of that, and until I really felt that, one, I'm really kind of emotionally ready to take on these kinds of responsibilities. It is not easy to fire someone when they have 2 kids at home. It is not an easy thing to do. It is not easy to go to investors and tell them, I may not be able to return your capital, right? It's a very different kind of disappointment. And I think to handle those disappointments, by the way, there's big ones and then there's micro disappointments. And
Can you chop them into micro disappointments, like the big ones?
I mean, yes, because there's definitely a buildup to that, and there's like a fallout.
You send an email
that.
every day with a big part,
it's
like a
guys,
small part.
Just to let you know, there's something coming up.
Yeah.
I really need to talk to you. Maybe we can go party our face off first, and then, I felt like I just wasn't quite there. And the next thing that I did, certainly, I wanted to do in earnest. I wanted the right team around me. I wanted to feel 100% bought into that mission. It's also why, by the way, after venture, I joined a company called ResearchGate, which was 100% mission-driven, and it was really an entirely different experience and different mode of operating. You could suffer a lot more when you really feel that the thing you're doing is bigger than you. So absolutely. I mean, those were generally my learnings. It's the reason why I haven't started a company since. But people who know you over time and the opportunities that kind of come around over time, it started feeling better and better of a fit, right? So I joined Target Global last year, and two of the general partners there I had worked with at Hassel-Plattner Ventures, and they know me. They've seen me fuck up many times. They've seen me grow up. They've seen me make amazing bets, right? So Go Euro was one of my early investments, and today they're almost €1 billion valued company. And they invited me back to work with them. And they also know that I get bored a little bit easily, that if they just made me do this one job, that over time I would be like, guys, give me something else, right? So they knew that they know that I have a bit of an entrepreneurial flair, and decided, okay, we won't force you to do it, but we highly encourage you to go out to Spain, Barcelona, where we have 4 portfolio companies, and think about opening an office there. Right, so here I am.
Because you studied philosophy, you can do that, right?
I can do anything. I can talk my way into or out of anything.
Exactly.
Absolutely. So I'm here now. I'm looking around. I'm looking at what's here. I think it's a beautiful, beautiful city, and definitely week by week, month by month, I'm getting more confident in a positive decision to be based here.
That's great. That's great. Actually, before delving into more of the VC world, I wanted to ask this last one thing is, what kept you going? Because as an entrepreneur, it's always difficult to let go of your project because it's your child. You mentioned it, right? Our former speaker, previous speaker, David Tomas, said, you got to keep going until you realize that it's Sunday and you're like, man, my life is shit. I don't want to go to work tomorrow.
Yeah.
Right? So what's your opinion on this? What kept you going there? What's your drive?
Yeah. I mean, I wish I could just tell you it was all like idealistic hoo-ha, right? Like I want to change the world. I mean, definitely was a lot of that, but those companies that I was operating wasn't actually doing that. So I can't actually say that anymore. Mm-hmm. It was for me at the time really exciting to have this opportunity, living around the world, building companies, hiring people, building product, going to market, getting slapped in the face every day, right? All these micro disappointments. At the end of the day, I would say there were a few things. One was I kept in mind that no matter the outcome, I would walk away from this whole thing with an incredible story, with an incredible experience, with incredible learnings. And I think that, above anything, was truly, truly motivating. I think the other thing was the people that I worked with, my co-founders and the people in my team, were, for me, they're not family. I don't like to say that my colleagues are my family because that's just not true. But they were the closest thing that I had to very intimate daily relationships, right? And I cared about these people, and they cared about me, and they cared about the success of our whole project, right? Of our whole company. So these things definitely motivated me to no end in those low moments, especially. And I have to also be honest, there was definitely an element of ego, there was definitely an element of wanting to prove myself and making a little bit of cash, right? That's, in the end, what we hope for, right? It doesn't have to be billions, it can just be a couple.
Yeah, some millions, right?
Exactly.
So how was this transition to VC in terms of, do you feel like you're too entrepreneurial for working in a more, let's say, like, not corporate, but like a VC where perhaps things move slower? Because I've heard that from several entrepreneurs turned VCs. They're like, I'm too fast. I got to slow down, expectations lower. I can do this. I can't say that.
Yeah.
How do you feel?
I've only worked in 2 funds, so
Yeah.
I don't really know how it is. But in my experience, it really depends on the fund.
Yeah.
At Target Global, we're rather relatively young for venture capitalists. I think we're average age is something like early to mid 30s, and we're incredibly ambitious people. I would consider all of us entrepreneurs in our own right. We've started the fund about 7 years ago. Started fundraising, started investing about 5.5, and today we're a 700 million AUM firm, right? Managing 3-4 pockets of individual funds, and it's really. I think it's really about the environment and the attitude of people that you're surrounded with. The fact that my GPs, they said, okay, like you don't have to do this, but we 100% support you if you want to do, if you have the ambition to do. I would say that's an incredible entrepreneurial mindset. They saw an opportunity in Spain. They said, okay, we have 4 investments there. For some reason, that like three of them are really hitting it, and that's an indicator, right?
Yep.
So here I am, and I think this is definitely much more of a mentality than like a structural.
Definitely. And how about, so were recently promoted to being investments director. So what's the mission of Target Global, and what kind of companies you want to meet?
Yeah. So we saw a
We might have some here, right?
Yeah, definitely. Come talk to me. We saw a huge kind of, let's say, gap in the venture capital market, right? At the end of the day, venture capital, by the way, is also a business. And one thing that I think Europe especially lacks is a fund that, first of all, can grow and be with the company from the very first check to the very end. I think for some reason, for most of the funds that we see, especially in Berlin, in the last 5-10 years, most of the funds are what we call like seed funds, early stage funds, right? And these entire teams manage this one fund. They will invest in you early on. They might be able to participate their pro rata or little, their equivalent of ownership over time. But there's very, very few funds in Europe, that can really kind of help you grow and double down from like seed to D to exit, right? And this, I think, was something that we see in the U.S., by the way. We see incredible, multi-billion-dollar funds today having these seed programs. They have an early stage fund, they have growth and late stage. For Target Global, I would say that's kind of where we see ourselves, and our vision is to really kind of help grow with those companies. We have several examples of that in our portfolio. And by the way, we're always happy to have people kind of speak with our portfolio companies to get that reference on us, right?
You invested in Buddy and in TravelPerk. That's why people might know about Target Global here in Barcelona. When's the right time for companies to talk to you? And what's the best way to get in touch with Target Global?
So, again, I can only speak for myself, right?
Yeah.
Because we are each individuals. We all have our different styles. In the end, we are all kind of going for the same goal. But every venture capitalist comes with their unique set of experiences and backgrounds. So for me personally, I love to meet entrepreneurs from like literally negative days. I am thinking of starting a company. What should I do? Because the way I met some of the portfolio CEOs that I've invested in, those were the moments where I thought, okay, like I can be a part of this story, not to take let's say credit for it or anything like that, right? But I can really help you with the hundreds, if not almost 1,000 companies, maybe over the last 10 years being in tech, right? All the different models, all the different approaches. I could really maybe contribute to this, right? And I think there's no real right time for me. If you're talking about more specifically in our, say, deal process or like check size, I can give you a very manufactured answer. So that's kind of when you're with the seed check, we can do pre-product, pre-market. Very rare. We have maybe 5 or 6 of those in our portfolio. More likely to get funding is when you have gone to market and you have some sort of signal that you can show us, and you can actually talk about some, let's say, some substance in your assumptions, right? So I would say for early stage, that's really a great time. For growth, I would argue you would have to be making revenue, ideally between 5 and 10 million annual revenue. For growth ticket, that's usually what funds want to see, and that's certainly what we want to see.
One change I've seen in the industry is some years back, obviously there was more scarcity of startups and perhaps it was not so well spread. And VCs were a little bit elusive and maybe arrogant in a way, as in like, hey, you come to talk to me if you want my money. Whereas nowadays, it seems like you go out, you go to events, you talk to people well before the point where they're interesting to you. Is it because you notice that deal flow is more scarce or perhaps is worse? Or why did that happen?
That's a great question. So in my opinion, I think there's a few things. I think capital is becoming more competitive in Europe. We've definitely seen an explosion of venture funds, seed funds, early stage funds in the last 5 years, I would say.
Yep.
So that's definitely one. I think the second thing is venture capital itself as an industry is certainly also seeing some disruption. And I think the behavior of investors has to change with that, right? It's no longer this in the 80s when you were like the fifth, there were only like 5 funds around in the neighborhood, right? That you can really behave that way. I think I think that's really also quite an individual thing. It's really in the character of who that partner or investment member is, but yeah.
What's the vision for Barcelona? I like to ask this question because we tend to believe that we're the best in the world. We know we're not, because obviously it would be like in freaking Silicon Valley, right, in terms of startups, but we're not. And we always pride ourselves. You see some some people in the industry always sharing like, oh, Barcelona, top city, this is for this, for design, for smart cities. Like, yeah, great news. But how about the projects? How do you perceive it as a VC and why did you decide to move here? So what's your vision for Barcelona? Can you forecast?
Well, I can't forecast, man. It's probably going to be really, really hard. I mean, what I can say is the patterns that I see, and some of the patterns are, right now I meet a lot of very hungry entrepreneurs. There is a lack of capital in the market to a large extent, especially for, let's say, beyond A, but also for seed rounds, right? With investors around the table that aren't pushing you for, let's say, profitability in year one, which I find that I hear that very often here, and I kind of question, why is that the metric you're optimizing for in your first year of existence as a business? In fact, it should be growth and a lot of different learnings and product innovation and business model innovation. Certainly, there will need to be adjustments made in your plans, right? Because nothing is that perfect. I would be very, very skeptical if it were. So I see that there's a lack of capital. I see there are a lot of hungry entrepreneurs. I also see, it's a bit like Berlin. It reminds me of Berlin 8-9 years ago when there's a lot of excitement in the market, a lot of young people entering the workforce here, willing to take more and more risk. Also on the capital side, willing to take more and more risk. What I also see is that that's not like Berlin, though, is that there are already entrepreneurial minds here, right? Whether it was a retail business, maybe it was a creative agency, there is actually, I don't know what it is, maybe it's something cultural, but there's definitely a spirit of entrepreneurship here that I was very surprised to find. And pleasantly surprised to find. So I think moving forward, let's call it the next 5 years, I definitely see some very dominant industries, hopefully some dominant industries coming out of Barcelona. One of them is definitely on the consumer side. I think there is very strong kind of affinity here for things like design and brand. I think some of the best fashion labels, like mass consumer fashion brands, come from Barcelona. The people who work in those companies will eventually move around the market, right? Human capital shouldn't be underestimated. The way the Silicon Valley, for example, became the Valley was because people moved from AT&T Park to Yahoo, to Google, right? They took and grew their experience across all of these companies. And what I'm kind of seeing right now in Barcelona is a very similar trend in consumer. I'm going to make this bet, but I don't know if how it's going to pan out is also in, let's say, SMB mid-market B2B software. So one of our investments is TravelPerk. And like we in our team, we had a long discussion about this. Actually, we were like, so what's a big software company that's in Spain? Is there like a NICE? Is there like a SAP? Is there a Salesforce here? There's not actually so many, let's say, large software companies that came out of Spain, right? Maybe in the last 10 years there's more and more. But really, in terms of like old dominant players, there is none. And what does that mean, right? That means that enterprise sales, it means that enterprise product development, like all of those skill sets that are required, aren't really here yet, right? So that's on the one side. On the other hand, I do see actually way more than consumer startups. I see way more software B2B startups being started here, and it's kind of confusing for me. But I think I'm pretty optimistic on that. I think there's as Europe opens up and as people are moving across borders and as companies look for corp dev opportunities, not just in their backyard but also elsewhere, I think this will definitely be, hopefully be a segment that really booms here.
Last one before we wrap this up is, how are you perceived as a foreign investor? Because even though we're opening up, like Catalans traditionally aren't very welcoming. Yeah. We're not extremely warm. I mean, could be worse, but I guess we've got this one defect. So as an external player from the industry, do they perceive you as competitor? Did they like close the doors? Did they open doors? So was it surprisingly helpful, or how was it?
Definitely on the entrepreneurial side, it was like wide open arms, like hello, right?
But finally.
I also say the same for other VCs. I think there's a kind of realization that, again, there's a lot more, let's say, global or pan-European capital that's coming to Barcelona and into Spain and also in Portugal and Italy. I think there's a lot more kind of movement. So local, let's say local VCs, local funds, or local pockets of money are starting to kind of embrace that, right? Either you embrace it or you don't. And I think it would be in their best interest to rather cooperate than not. So actually, I haven't really experienced a lot of negativity or let's say weird perceptions. I do think there will be some, let's say, conflict on how we see a good early stage or high growth company. One of the things I've mentioned was really like, what are the metrics that you're looking at, and when you're sitting on the board, what are you driving the entrepreneur towards? So what is that North Star metric? And so definitely there's going to be like a clash of, let's say, ideologies or school of thoughts, right, on how to grow a business. But yeah.
Last two really quick questions, really quick answers. The first one is, how can we help you or Target Global? Well,
as always, I would love to meet entrepreneurs. I'd love to get anyone knocking on my door. So by the way, I sit in TravelPerk's office, but I promised them I wouldn't have strangers just walking all over their office. So I'm all around the city. So definitely reach out to me. I have very limited, I'm on your asshole point earlier, I think most venture capitalists don't actually want to be assholes. Literally, we have no time. Our lives are lived in 1 hour increments, and I'm trying to make that like 45-minute increments. It's challenging. But I would love to meet you guys. I would love to just hear what is going on in the city also, like whatever, even if you're not an entrepreneur, right? So I worked in product, I worked in monetization. I would just love to hear what topics are challenging you. One thing that I love to also organize is and try and bring experts from our other portfolio companies or in our network to give very like small, intimate talks. It's rather like an open discussion on things like product, go-to-market, data, how when to hire people, hard skill, soft skill topics. So.
Last question is, everybody has got a useless superpower. Which one is yours?
Philosophizing.
Yeah, I could see that coming. I wanted to bet on that one. Yeah. I was like, I put like $50 or something, like, she's gonna say this.
I overthink.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Alex.
She wants to talk to people, even to philosophers. So time to open the floor for questions. So Victor, if you're so kind to help us with this. So the rules are one question per person, try to be as generic, so no pitching and all of that. You know how it works. You've come some events, Adriana.
Just to break the ice.
Yeah.
Do you have any problem like by being a woman and receiving like a startup and the guy, the startup coming and say like, hey, I want to talk with your partner. I don't want to talk with you. It's like, do you have any situations like that?
All the time. As a founder, as an investor, honestly, I don't care. And why don't I care? I think we have bigger things to worry about in this world. I also think that there's a bit of like, let's say, understanding. I think that we all, like whether you're a guy or woman, like we need to understand each other's context, right? So if we've grown up our entire lives expecting a man in a suit to walk through that door, they're going to be surprised when they don't see a man in a suit walk through that door, right? It's going to be like, hey, honey, what are you doing here? Are you lost? Yeah, it's true, right? And we also have to be understanding of that context. I think right now in the world, for some reason, I don't know what's happening, but there's this dialogue of just black and white. There's no like, where's all the awesome in-between grayscale, right? And so yes, I've definitely had, and when it gets like obviously offensive, I will say something. But most of the time, people don't mean harm. They don't mean ill on others. It is literally just what they're used to, right? And yeah. And how do I overcome that? I literally just try not to think about it so much. Yeah.
Great question, thank you.
Hi, I have a crazy question.
Yeah.
I'm Otman from Belgium. I would like to know if you would play lottery and win, like, let's say, many millions, what would you do differently?
If I had millions, what would I do differently? God, I mean, I'd probably have more furniture in my apartment. I literally have like 5 pieces of furniture. I have like this idea that I might like pack my bags and go somewhere tomorrow, right?
Would you think logically, or would you be, spending them? What would you do?
I don't really know. I don't actually know. I haven't thought that far. No, I mean, definitely one of the things that I've always dreamed of was I would definitely spend it. But I would spend it so I grew up in LA, and I don't know if anyone else here, except for maybe that guy over there, who knows the Los Angeles Unified School District. It is terrible. It is one of the worst schools. I remember when I was about 12 or 13, they decided to get rid of algebra and geometry. They're like, okay, now you're just gonna learn something called integrated math. I'm like, what is integrated math? It's, I think there is definitely some very fundamental broken things in our society. That's maybe also a contributor to a lot of the weird kind of things that we're seeing today. And I'm sure, by the way, in the greater context of things are actually getting better. I mean, we see all these reports, right? But back to your question, I would definitely maybe buy some more stuff, but not so much. I think more so, I would really like to support people, right? So I grew up in East LA. I didn't grow up wealthy. I grew up to immigrant parents, right? And I think if it weren't for the opportunities that I had growing up in the U.S. and the support that I had around me, I would definitely not be here today. It's not to say that I think people should become lazy and have no grit, right? But I think for those people who really want something, they should have opportunity. Yeah, so that's probably how I would spend some of my money. And then the rest I'd probably invest in.
Okay. We haven't seen a lot of public IPOs for European startups. Most of the exits I've seen from here is either they go to the US and via US they get an IPO, or they get acquired by one of the bigger competitors from the US.
Yeah.
Do you think it's just a matter of where European ecosystem is in terms of maturity, and it will change in the future, or do you think this trend will continue and this is the end game for European startups because of the access to like the market size and everything else?
That's a great question, and a pretty difficult one to answer. I mean, from a very practical standpoint, when I see companies raising in the volumes of hundreds of millions here, those companies are usually not even European entities. They are incorporated in the US. Why is that? That's where the capital is. And I think, I mean, so that's where all like the back side of the business is being run, right? Even if your markets are here, your teams are here, your operational presence is here. I think so that's one thing. So it very early on in a company's life, I think they're already thinking like, we're going to the States, right? In terms of exit markets, there probably is a portion of that has to do with acquisition offers and really how big a company can scale here. So the US is one market, I mean, it's not simple, but it is much more simple than trying to scale in Europe, right? So high fragmentation, EU as a whole is a huge market, but individually not. So I think for any one company to really find the scale and kind of hit big and go public here in their local market probably isn't like the biggest outcome scenario that anyone is envisioning, right? I think in terms of acquisition offers and things like that, I would say maybe most European companies tend to sell pretty early, right? They want to. It's a lot on mentality of the people who are essentially running that show, and I think it's a very like multifaceted answer, and I'm very happy to go into way more details of that. Not sure if that fully answered your question though.
No, that did. I worked in Silicon Valley, and now I work for Glovo, so I understand the international context here.
Yeah.
Like the scaling part.
Yeah.
We can talk about it later.
Yeah,
Thank
I
you.
think literally from like almost day zero, people are just like, okay, we're gonna go to the US. You know, we're gonna raise from US funds, and we're gonna go public there. Yeah. So I think it has a lot to do with even before IPO. It was like built in almost.
Can we take two more really fast ones?
Yeah, back here.
Hey, hello.
Hi, Lina. Great to have you here
Thank
and
you.
to hear another fellow American. Just wondering, when you mentioned a lot about consumer products and consumer, I'm just wondering if you're thinking about social entrepreneurial projects. What's your take on that with the
Yeah.
venture capitalists and the whole investment scenario? They have a social connotation, mission,
Yeah.
a lot in technology. So they're more mission-driven, I would say.
Right.
And there is lack of funding, and there's opportunity there. And I was wondering if that's something that you and your team are looking into.
Yeah, so I would say it's not something that we're actively looking into as like a vertical, right? So right now, social entrepreneurship, when there is a company that comes to us and they have like a pretty solid product, they have pretty solid plan, it's going to be a business. And on top of that, they're changing something for the better. Absolutely, we love that. That's like, it checks all the boxes, right? Let's say in terms of social entrepreneurship that is more like a nonprofit, right? That's not something that we would really like seriously consider. I think there is other sources of capital that is raised just for those kinds of projects. So yeah, I mean, for us personally, we do love it when there is like kind of that aspect or that overall mission. But generally, it's what we don't really see a whole lot is a solid business that can really be like a multi-billion outcome that is also very explicitly a social kind of has a social like DNA. Yeah, it's hard. Those two worlds are very hard to bridge. ResearchGate, by the way, is struggling. They raised 90 million across their lifetimes, right? And they're struggling still to really fully realize their mission. Those things are things that are not like 10, 15-year outcomes. They're really 20, 30 years. I think it's incredibly important for those kinds of companies to have the right capital. Venture capital itself is a business. We usually want to see capital return to our own investors within 10 years. For smaller funds, even shorter. So it has to fit the business, right? It has to fit that timeline and the return.
All right. Great question. Last question, please.
Hi. So on hiring, you mentioned, and apologies, I'm not actually Los Angeles, San Francisco, but California's family. Cheers.
Awesome.
You mentioned the joys, I'm being sarcastic, about firing someone with 2 children at home. I'm wondering if there are qualities in people you're looking to hire now that have become more important than what you thought was important when you started hiring anyone.
The qualities, sorry.
That as you got more experience,
Yeah.
what you thought was important at first changed to become something else.
I mean, in terms of hard skills.
In terms of, I don't know, responsibility, integrity, not beyond just you have the basic skills you need.
Absolutely.
Or if there were other things that people, for example, Google, I heard, tends to focus a lot on humility for their
Yeah.
C-level executives.
That is a great question, and absolutely. I think over the years I've learned that it's not hiring just for the sake of hiring and filling out like a full-time, like an FTE number. These people are people that you're trusting, that you're literally giving away a huge chunk of your responsibility to. And you would need to rely on them in ways where you probably can't imagine, right? So absolutely, I do look for things like honesty. I try and have very difficult, honest conversations. If also you're the kind of person who cannot talk about hard feelings, we probably won't get along because I do like to address those concerns as well in my team. Yes. I thought the question was going in a slightly different direction. I do not ask if you have kids. I think if you're going to be an entrepreneur, you should just assume everybody has like 10 kids, and like that's literally the level of responsibility you have. But yes, in terms of characteristics and in terms of these let's say qualities, I put definitely way more emphasis on that. It's not to say, by the way, it doesn't make up, like, for the hard skills are also really important, right? But yes, absolutely.
Thank you very much. Big applause, please, for Lina.